The sun hung low over Oak Ridge Estates, casting a warm golden glow across manicured lawns and pristine driveways. It was supposed to be a perfect Saturday afternoon, rare moment of joy for my 16-year-old daughter, Sarah, who sat on our front porch in her wheelchair, surrounded by a small group of new friends. Laughter filled the air as they shared stories and sipped lemonade, the kind of carefree teenage moment Sarah had rarely experienced since her cerebral palsy diagnosis at age 3. We had moved to this upscale neighborhood 3 weeks ago, hoping for a fresh start, a place where Sarah could feel included. But as I watched from the kitchen window, a shadow loomed over that fragile happiness, a shadow named Victoria Blackwell. Victoria, or Miss Vicky, as she insisted on being called, stormed across our lawn, her designer heels sinking slightly into the grass. In her hand, she clutched a bright orange citation, the third we'd received that week. Her shrill voice sliced through the afternoon's tranquility. "You people don't belong here," she barked, her eyes fixed on Sarah, who shrank back in her wheelchair, her hands trembling on the wheels. The other teenagers froze, their laughter dying as Victoria's tirade began. "This is a violation. The third this week," she shouted, waving the citation like a weapon. The veins in her neck bulged as she pointed accusingly at Sarah, whose wide eyes filled with fear. I stepped onto the porch, my heart pounding but my voice steady. "Miss Blackwell," I said, positioning myself between her and my daughter, "there's nothing in the HOA regulations against a few friends visiting. 15 years as an FBI special agent had taught me to keep my emotions in check, even in the face of blatant hostility." But Victoria was undeterred. "Don't lecture me about regulations," she spat, her manicured finger jabbing toward my chest. Her designer sunglasses slipped down her nose, revealing cold, disdainful eyes. "I've been president of Oak Ridge Estates for 8 years. That hideous ramp, those garden stones, that handrail, all unapproved modifications." Sarah's friends stood mortified, rooted to the porch. A girl named Zoe, with short-cropped hair and a fierce expression, placed a protective hand on Sarah's shoulder. But even this small act of kindness seemed to enrage Victoria further. "This community was pristine before you moved in," she continued, her voice rising. "Now we have all these eyesores and this noisy gathering." In her hand, she held a glass of iced tea, gesturing wildly as she spoke. Whether it was intentional or not, I'll never know, but her hand swung too wide. The glass struck Sarah's face with a sickening crack, shattering on impact. Sarah cried out, the sugary liquid splashing into her eyes as a sharp edge sliced her cheek. Blood trickled down her face, mixing with tears and tea. "Dad!" Sarah's terrified voice sent ice through my veins. I rushed to her side, my training kicking in automatically. Kneeling beside her, I pressed my handkerchief to the cut, noting with professional detachment that it would need stitches. Sarah's body trembled under my touch, her soft whimpers breaking my heart. "It hurts," she whispered, her speech more slurred than usual in her distress. "Why does she hate me so much, Dad?" The question gutted me. How do you explain hate to a child who has only ever known love? Victoria stood frozen, the empty glass stem still clutched in her hand. For a fleeting moment, shock crossed her face, but it was quickly replaced by defensive indignation. "It was an accident," she snapped, stepping back. "She shouldn't have been in the way." Something inside me snapped. The careful restraint I'd honed over years of high-stakes operations evaporated. "Everyone inside," I instructed Sarah's friends, my voice deadly calm. "Call Sarah's doctor. Her number's on the fridge." As the teenagers helped my wounded daughter inside, I turned to Victoria, who was already retreating toward her gleaming white Mercedes. "You just assaulted my disabled daughter," I said, each word precise and measured. "Do you have any idea who you're dealing with?" Victoria Blackwell had introduced herself the day we moved in, her perfectly coiffed blonde hair and perpetual scowl setting the tone. She'd handed me a 3-inch binder of HOA regulations, her eyes lingering disapprovingly on the wheelchair ramp I'd installed for Sarah. "We maintain certain standards here," she'd said, her tone dripping with condescension. I'd nodded, too busy with moving boxes to engage in neighborhood politics. In my years with the Bureau, I'd learned to pick my battles. Little did I know the battle would come to me. It started with the first orange citation, taped to our mailbox as we pulled into the driveway of our modest 2-story home. Sarah spotted it immediately. "What's that, Dad? Are we in trouble?" Worry creased her forehead, and I forced a smile. "Of course not, Pumpkin. It's probably just neighborhood information." But my instincts told me otherwise. The The citation was for unauthorized exterior modifications, the wheelchair ramp. It demanded prior approval and removal within 7 days or daily fines. My jaw tightened, but I kept my expression calm for Sarah's sake. Nothing important, sweetheart. Just some paperwork I'll handle. That evening, after helping Sarah with her homework and physiotherapy exercises, I pored over the HOA regulations. The binder made no mention of prohibiting accessibility modifications, which were protected under the Fair Housing Act. I drafted a polite email to Victoria, explaining Sarah's needs and citing federal law. Her response arrived at 6:30 the next morning. Rules are rules, Mr. Matthews. The aesthetic appeal of our community affects everyone's property values. Your situation does not exempt you from following proper procedures. The word situation made my blood boil, as if Sarah's disability was an inconvenience to her precious neighborhood. I decided to attend the next HOA meeting to address the issue directly. The community center was packed when Sarah and I arrived. Heads turned as I wheeled her down the aisle. Some neighbors smiled warmly. Others averted their eyes, uncomfortable with Sarah's visible difference. Victoria sat at the center of a long table, gavel in hand, her eyes narrowing when she saw us. Public comments are limited to 2 minutes, she announced coldly when I raised my hand, and must pertain to agenda items only. My name is James Matthews, I began, keeping my voice level. My daughter Sarah and I recently moved to Oak Ridge Estates. I've received a citation regarding our wheelchair ramp, a necessary accommodation for Sarah's mobility. The gavel came down hard. As I said, comments must pertain to agenda items only, Victoria interrupted. The Architectural Review Committee handles individual violations privately. But this isn't just about aesthetics, I persisted. It's about accessibility and inclusion. Victoria's voice dripped with condescension. Mr. Matthews, we all follow the same rules. No exceptions. If we allowed everyone to modify their homes without approval, Oak Ridge wouldn't be the prestigious community people paid for. A few neighbors nodded in agreement. Others looked uneasy but stayed silent. Sarah tugged at my sleeve. Dad, it's okay. We can go, she whispered, her eyes downcast. The humiliation on her face broke my heart. We're not done here, I whispered back, squeezing her hand. Over the next week, I documented everything. Photographs of similar modifications around the neighborhood that hadn't been cited, support from sympathetic neighbors, and consultations with an attorney specializing in housing discrimination. The orange citations kept coming. One for garden stones creating a path wide enough for Sarah's wheelchair, another for the handrail beside our front steps. Each felt like a personal attack on Sarah's right to live comfortably in her own home. Then came that fateful Saturday. Sarah's friends were gathered on the porch, their laughter a rare sound in our new home. I was in the kitchen, slicing lemons for lemonade, when Victoria's voice carried through the open window. Excuse me, young lady. Your music is too loud, and this gathering wasn't approved by the social committee. By the time I reached the door, Victoria was towering over Sarah, wagging a manicured finger. Furthermore, this contraption is blocking the sidewalk, she said, gesturing to Sarah's wheelchair. Sarah's eyes welled with tears. Zoe stood up defiantly. You can't talk to Sarah like that. She's not doing anything wrong. Victoria's eyes narrowed, her hand clutching a glass of iced tea. In a movement that seemed almost deliberate, she gestured wildly, the glass striking Sarah's face. The crack echoed as it shattered, the sharp edge cutting her cheek. Blood and tea streamed down her face. Dad, it hurts, Sarah cried, her hand pressed to her cheek. I was beside her in an instant, shielding her from the shards. Victoria stood frozen, shock flickering across her face before she snapped. It was an accident. She shouldn't have been in the way. Everyone inside, I said to Sarah's friends, my voice low but firm. Call the doctor. As they helped Sarah inside, I turned to Victoria. You assaulted my disabled daughter. Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? She scoffed, uncertainty in her eyes. Are you threatening me? I'm calling security. I pulled out my FBI badge, letting it catch the sunlight. Special Agent James Matthews, Federal Bureau of Investigation. You've just assaulted a minor with a disability in front of witnesses. That's a federal hate crime. The color drained from Victoria's face. It was an accident. I didn't mean to. Save it for your statement. I cut her off. Local police arrived within the hour, taking statements from Sarah's friends and neighbors who had witnessed the incident. Sarah received 5 stitches for the cut on her cheek, her eyes still red from tears. I filed a formal complaint against Victoria for assault and violations of the Fair Housing Act. What she didn't know was that I specialized in civil rights violations at the Bureau, building cases against those who believed their privilege placed them above the law. Within days, Victoria was removed from the HOA board pending investigation. The interim president, a retired judge named Howard, approved all our accessibility modifications and issued a formal apology to Sarah. But I wasn't done. I organized a neighborhood meeting in our front yard, where Sarah's friends set up chairs and handed out flyers. Nearly 70 residents attended, some hesitant, others curious. One by one, neighbors shared their own stories of Victoria's tyranny. An elderly couple fined for a bench to help the husband with his heart condition. A single mother nearly bankrupted by fines for a basketball hoop for her son. Neighborhoods aren't about property values, I told the crowd, Sarah beside me, her stitched cheek held high. They're about people with all abilities and needs. We don't need uniformity, we need humanity. The crowd was silent, then erupted in applause. Sarah squeezed my hand, her smile brighter than the sun. 3 months later, Victoria pleaded guilty to misdemeanor assault and was sentenced to community service at a center for children with disabilities. The housing discrimination case led to an overhaul of the HOA regulations, with a new accessibility committee that invited Sarah to join. The transformation in Oak Ridge was profound. Neighbors who once avoided Sarah now stopped to chat. Families invited us to barbecues and pool parties. The Accessibility Committee, led by Sarah, worked to make Oak Ridge a model of inclusive living. Remarkably, Victoria changed too. Her community service hours became voluntary work. The woman who once sneered at Sarah's situation began advocating for accessibility citywide. Sometimes we need our worst selves exposed to become our best selves, she said when asked about her transformation. On Sarah's 17th birthday, the neighborhood surprised her with an adaptive garden plot, complete with raised beds she could tend from her wheelchair. Her sunflowers grew taller than anyone expected, their golden faces tracking the sun, just like Sarah's spirit. "You know, Dad," she said one evening, the scar on her cheek now a faint silver line. "Sometimes the worst things lead to the best things." I hugged her tightly. "That's because you're stronger than any obstacle, sweetheart. You've taught this neighborhood what strength looks like." As the sun set over Oak Ridge, I watched neighbors chat across accessible pathways. Children play on inclusive playgrounds, and elderly residents rest on benches once deemed violations. Justice came through investigations and court cases, but the deepest justice was in changed hearts. Victoria hadn't known I was an FBI agent, but what she truly didn't realize was that Sarah's courage would transform a community's understanding of inclusion, far beyond what any badge could achieve. The most powerful weapon against discrimination wasn't my credentials. It was Sarah's unwavering spirit and the ripples of change she inspired.